Now we're ready to start a new course. We need to go up to File, click that, and you'll see New Course is the first option. There's also an Import option. This is for importing terrain data. If you've got access to DEM files with real terrain data, you can load these in and build your course on those. It's not something I've done yet, so I'm not going to be dealing with that in these videos, so maybe at a later date I will have a look at it. But for now we're going to create a course from scratch, so we want to click New Course. I don't want to save anything at the moment. And we get up the New Course Terrain Wizard. Just before we deal with this, I'll quickly go to Advanced Settings and show you there are two options for your mesh, hexagonal and square mesh. Hexagonal is the default mesh here. If I click it to square mesh, okay, great, you'll see our mesh has now turned into triangles making squares. Now this is what I was referring to in an earlier video with these sort of square shaped triangles. I can't really say whether this is a better way of working. It doesn't look like it would be for me, which is why I've stuck with the hexagonal default. So if you want to try it, by all means go ahead. I'm going to stick with the default setting. New course, don't want to save it, and here's our terrain wizard again. Now length and width, we can double click in these. This one's already selected, which is why it's blue, so I can just type in straight away numbers. I would suggest that 2000 is a better starting point, maybe even 3000, than the 1000 yard defaults, which really probably isn't big enough, especially when you're a beginner. The more space you've got, the better. And it's very easy to trim your course back down to a smaller size, far easier than if you start small and find it's not big enough and have to add more terrain. That's a little bit more tricky, so we'll double click on that one. So I'd suggest 2000, 3000, good starting size. No need to touch the default terrain type, that's just the rough that's displayed here. Now this allow non-regulation fairways is a definite no-no. Do not check this under any circumstances. It's known to be bugged and will cause problems on your course that can't be repaired. So we'll now go back to advanced settings. These two settings, height from grid, density, I'd really leave those at default. 100 foot is the height above sea level, so that's quite handy. It means when we sink the ground down, it won't go below sea level, hopefully. And the density is the distance between the verts. So at the moment, the distance between two verts, 100 foot, about 33 yards. You can set that to put more verts on, so you get a more detailed mesh. But really, we're going to be adding verts anyway where we want them as we draw in things. So it's rather pointless putting a lot of verts on that might not be necessary, because all the verts are going to add to the file size. They're also going to slow the rendering down. So if you can keep the verts to a minimum, it's far better. So default settings, I wouldn't touch any of those. Once you've got everything set, click on create. And our mesh has now been created with the new settings. Now the first thing I'd do before anything else is go to edit, course properties, and you'll see here enter course name. Give your course a name. At this stage it doesn't matter what you call it, you can change this at any time, but if you don't put a name in these course properties, when you come to testing your course out and putting it in links, you'll find you can't find it because the name's blank. Links won't be able to find the name, so something needs to be put into here. It's already highlighted blue, so I can just type in test course, or if you know the name you're going to call your course, put that in. Yeah, one tip is give it a name that begins with AAA or something like that, like a telephone directory. You'll get it to the front of the list, so it will save you time having to scroll through your list of courses when you want to test it. It will be the first course, so if you call it AAA test or something like that. So we click OK. The course hasn't been saved. Would you like to do this now? We'll say yes. Now we need to give the course file a name. Now this doesn't have to be anything to do with the name of the course. We can call it, again, whatever we like, but I usually call it the name of the course and then test. I usually then put a 1A after it. That way the next one will be saved as 1B, 1C. When I run out of letters, I'll go to 2A, 2B, and carry on like that. It's really important to keep as many copies of your course as you can, because if you get any corruptions later on, and things will happen, and believe me, APCD likes corrupting things from time to time, if you've been overwriting the same file all the time, you won't be able to go back. You'll have lost all the work you've done, so make sure you keep saving under a different name as much as you can. So I'll click save, and we've now got our course saved. Now I'll just demonstrate one of the first tools I mentioned over here. One of the two tools I mentioned was the tape measure and the line of sight, and I can demonstrate the tape measure now by clicking on it. And this can only be used on the top view, and basically we put it where we want to start measuring from, click and hold and drag it, and you'll see the yardage comes up and we can measure things, and you'll see the distance between these two verts, 32 point whatever yards, which is 100 feet, which, if you remember, is the setting we've got for the distance between the verts when we created it. So that's all very well. Now you can turn it off again by coming over here and clicking again, which turns it off. But a quicker way, just right click when you're on the active screen, and as soon as you move your mouse, it's gone. Now when we start, our plot's completely flat. You can design your course on this flat plot and then create the hills and valleys later. But a lot of designers prefer to start with a landscape, so they'll create the terrain first and then mark the course around it, much like a real architect would have to do if he was working on a real plot. So in order to create a terrain to start with, we can go up to terrain, surface, and you'll see a bulldozer symbol here, which is the terrain builder. So if I click on that, I now get some sliders here that will allow me to shape the ground. There are also some presets. We've got smooth terrain, there's also bumpy terrain, smooth hills, etc. Now what these will do, when we click add to selection, they will add a random terrain to any selected faces we've got on our course. So if I come to select all, we've got our whole terrain plot selected. If I now click add to selection with this smooth terrain, you'll see, ta-da, it's all gone a bit lumpy. Probably see it better. Let's undo that. Edit, undo. If I put it on hills, probably see it a bit better. Add to selection. There we go. You can see it's created a terrain for us that we could build our course on, and we can undo this and redo it as many times as we like. If we do add to selection again, it will add to what's already been done, so we'll get more extreme hills and valleys if it happens to add or subtract to what's already been added or subtracted to. So undo that and leave that. So this is the terrain. We'll still be able to manipulate it later, but it's created from these sliders, and obviously you can, if you hover over these, you can see that's more hills, less hills, and that's higher hills and lower hills. So you can select these to what you want, the sort of terrain you're after, and click it. Now this is a good point to show you the other tool I said I use, which is the line of sight tool. So if I deselect our terrain, what you'll find when you're moving the perspective camera is it's going to take an awful long time if I want to be looking up here to scroll and get up there to have a look. So what we can use is the line of sight tool. If I click here, line of sight, this again can only be used on the top view. Wherever we click on our mesh and hold, that will position us there. So if I want to look at this hill here, which is up this corner, if I hold the mouse there and then drag the line, I can look in any direction. This line will show which direction I'm looking at. If I point it that way and let go, we've now moved to that spot there, and we're looking in that direction there. So it saves me having to zoom all the way there. I can get close-up views on any part of the course I like. So maybe this, I want to look down this valley here, and now I can scroll it. So we could, this would be quite a nice place to route a hole through maybe. Another thing we can do, if I just start again, another thing we can do is just select part of the course. So if I go to face and remember our tools, so say the drag select, what we can do is colour in bits that we want to be hills, probably quicker to box select some of this. So let's say we want a line of hills. I'm holding shift key again. Maybe we want a line of hills there, and maybe some more hills coming down here a bit. I can then go to drag select and add bits so that it doesn't look so square for now. Shape it off how I want it. And if we go back to the terrain surface builder now, if I click add to selection now, it's just added the hills to the areas I've selected. So line of sight again, I can have a look at those up a bit closer. So we'll go on the course and look. I can unselect. Of course, you'll see we've just added some hills in certain areas. So we can use this to create much more realistic terrain, because it's very rare that you get a uniform type of hill and valley over a whole course. You'll get flat areas and hilly areas. So if I undo the surface select, if we have this as our hills, say, let's undo the surface and flatten it. Say I select smooth hills for that area and add. I could then select the rest of the ground, and the easiest way to do that is go select invert, which will flip what's selected and what's not selected. We've now selected the rest. I could now set that to a much flatter terrain. In fact, I'll even slide the more hills down a bit, and maybe the height of the hills to almost flat, and add that. Now that's just added much more subtle changes. I can add to it maybe a couple of times. Deselect. So we've got a much more natural type of effect. It looks pretty flat from here, but there will be a lot of slopes. You tend not to see the slopes in the APCD. They're much more noticeable when you play the game. But that's how to create some terrain. We will manually be adjusting it later, but for starters, that's how to create a terrain to build your course on.